East River Railroad. Why they didn't do G?
this. Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready to rumble?
Good evening, guys. Welcome to the build show for January 2020. First one this year, of course. Bottom Running Live, we've got a bunch of stuff coming up for you guys this year. We've got Ralph starting back next month with the weathering show everybody's looking forward to, of course. Bill coming up on the 29th, a couple weeks away. Of course, we've got Johnny's show in a couple days and every Thursday as standard. We like to keep Johnny good and busy, keeps it from getting into trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I'm back in the garage again as I was last month. Since the building of the peninsula and stuff, I don't have really enough room to work on modules and video simultaneously, especially. Not to mention working on them in the living room got me a little closer to divorce than I was happy with. So the garage is a little more appealing. Not to mention we're going to be a little bit destructive tonight. So the garage is particularly useful for that. Me and Ralph were just in a bit of a discussion as we were talking about layout construction that I think is a pretty interesting topic to carry on for a moment as I bring you up to speed in a few minutes about where I've got to since last month. The debate over why I build the way I build. At first, I'm not at all telling anybody this is the way to do it. This is totally a how I do stuff. And I think that most of the same techniques are applicable. And some of the interesting building materials are applicable even if you choose to construct it differently. The model railroader who sells this gator board material has built a layout using a fairly conventional square box frame construction with risers and road bed using gator foam. Uses a lot of material. There's probably a lot of waste in that. I don't have anything against it doing that way. And I think if you're probably building your first layout, I think wood is pretty hard to argue with for predictability. When I started on mine, I had a different set of considerations. One, I wanted to play with a few things without wasting a lot of time building bench work. So I set the bar fairly high for myself, and I'm fairly critical of my own efforts, work, successes, or failures. And I wanted to see if I could do scenery that I had never done. The layout I'm currently building is my 13th, if you count all the several 4x8s that I built as a kid, a couple switching layouts, an in scale in the military, a couple large layouts through the years. With a big break, when I was coming back to the hobby this time, it was over 15 years or so of absence to the hobby. Static grass was not a thing, at least not in U.S. modelers, and some of the scenery techniques were just not up to par. And every layout I ever built was effectively plywood Pacifics. But if I'm going to do it, I wanted to do it at a pretty high level. Otherwise, I would have just chose a different hobby. Anything worth doing is worth overdoing. I wanted to do it pretty significantly. And what I've wanted is not this super fine scale layout that can't be touched. I didn't want that exactly. And the other extreme of the perspective are these operating layouts that are a glorified Risk board. If you guys are familiar with that game, that's a great board game, by the way, probably the best. I didn't want a role playing game, even though it is, with very little detail, nothing that's breakable, things that are out of scale and out of proportion. No condemnation for people who build that way. It's just not what I wanted. And I wasn't looking for a very super detailed layout that was not operational or not, maybe not even runnable. A lot of those guys tend, not always, but tend to build rail fanning layouts. Some of them are beautiful to look at, but I wanted a layout that I could operate with a group of fellas or myself and have a good time doing so, but that I could also build with a high degree or high fidelity of detail.
You heard it here. You heard it here first, guys. Andy wants to be a looper.
I wanted a bit of a compromise between the two. I wanted to strike a balance between fine scale, high fidelity, photo realistic to a point modeling that was operatable in a very prototypically traditional way. I have no personal interest in a layout that's not operatable. If you can't, and I think we have some upcoming shows talking about how to get there, but one of the keys to that is a brief aside to this is if you can't take your layout and stretch it out on a piece of paper with a pencil into a linear diagram, I don't personally have any idea how you might go about making that operatable. I'm sure it's probably possible. I don't personally know how to design an operation scheme that is adaptable to a layout that can't be stretched out linear. That's how they exist in the real world. Look at any map anywhere. It is a linear layout of the prototype's track plan. And what we're trying to do is recreate a very, very, very small window of that linear track alignment. So I wanted to build a small module. Yeah, I'll take a look in a few minutes. I wanted to build a very small module. So I built a 36-inch, I think, by 3-foot module with a straight stick of track across it diagonally, just in styrofoam, anticipating that I would go back and put that on a piece of wood or on a wood framework. And after the first couple layers, it wasn't that stout. I knew it was going to have to go on wood. But as I built up layers of styrofoam, much as I'm doing here on this module that we're going to work on tonight, as I built up some of those layers, it got a rigidity that I had not anticipated. The 2-inch foam, laminated 4 or 5 or 6, 7 layers deep, that turns into a big block of styrofoam. It's pretty stout on its own. Now, in the case of this module here, it's quite a bit narrower, can't have near the depth on it. And I had trouble figuring out the right solution to that without building a bit of a wood framework. The Gator board solved my problem. And we'll see in a minute as I turn it over and show you what I've got adhered together here. But the whole reason was to see if I could do scenery at a level that I would be satisfied with, because I'm an engineer in every way. By education, occupation, and personality, I'm an engineer, good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not an artist. I do enjoy some of the art form. I think I've possibly improved a bit in that way, but I'm ultimately an engineer in my mindset. I like accurate numbers, and I think math should be applied to basically everything. So that's tough when you're trying to do art. And building a layout, scenicking a layout, weathering structures and rolling stock, that's an art form, not an engineering task. And figuring out whether I could bridge that gap was a challenge that I wasn't sure I was up to or not. So I built a module strictly out of styrofoam. I did not build any framework. I did not build any benchwork. My layout has none of that stuff. My layout is just scenery with track work in it. I don't build anything else. When I build a module, I'm not building structure. I'm building the scenery. From the very get-go, I'm building scenery. Now,
Andy,
part of what's that?
Sparky wants to know why you're holding a hard hat.
Oh, well, we're going to get dirty here in a second. We got
Okay,
some
he
construction to do.
thought maybe somebody was going to throw something at you.
Well, I mean, there is that chance. So I even brought one so you can help me. So we're going to get dirty, and we're going to use some pretty serious tools to do so here in a minute. So, and why not? But Ralph was commenting on a Facebook thread that we've been commenting on the last few days about how part of my argument for why I build the way I chose to build, and a lot of this is luck. I chose to do a few things so that I could get my hands dirty. Not literally, because I don't like to get my hands dirty. So that I could get some tools dirty and see if I could model at any level comparable to Mike Confalone and Celios and the guys that I enjoy following the progress on their own layouts. I wanted my own layout to be some of that inspiration to me. That's it. I just wanted to be happy with my layout. And I knew I wasn't going to be if I couldn't do the scenery at that level. And I'm still not totally satisfied with anything I've done. The things that I've redone 3 or 4 times, I'm much happier with. And I think if I redo most of it. Maybe another 2 times, I'll probably be to the point where I could just detail it to complete it. That's not for everybody. Most everybody's not as picky necessarily, and most everybody can get it to a certain point and carry on. Me, I just keep nitpicking at it, and that's the joy of a layout. Is that it's a, in my opinion, is that it's a lifetime investment of continued satisfaction from it. Now, me and Ralph were talking about before we went live a moment ago about a Facebook thread we're talking about that part of the side benefits of my method of layout construction has been, and part of the benefit that I see to working with extruded foam, the pink stuff in my case, blue, green, I don't care what color, but extruded foam, is that it's spectacularly, in my opinion, and as usual, Ralph disagrees with me, and I like that. It's spectacularly easy to modify. I've changed a lot of stuff a lot of times, and it's really easy to take a blade to cut it down, slap some ground goop on it, dust it with some dirt. And in a matter of a couple hours, I've cut the hillside out, made a house seat, and covered it in dirt. Not that dissimilar from driving a bulldozer up the side of the hill and cutting it off. It's very prototypical in its way of thinking. Versus my argument against a more traditional framework and risers and road bed construction is if you've got a module and you cut a bunch of that plaster out, open it all the way up to the floor, not only is that pretty destructive, because I've been there. All my layouts before were built that way. And when I wanted to change something, I was very reluctant to do so because it's messy, destructive, and could take your layout out of operation for weeks. So you cut those holes out, you stick some risers up, you cut plywood, you run track, then you've got to, form it back up, plaster it back over, paint it, dirt it, etc. You can do things to improve it, but it's still more destructive and more time consuming. But as you'll see, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. I like extruded foam. There's a lot of people that absolutely hate this stuff. I have a few caveats with some of the people. Like Ken Patterson builds his out of styrofoam. When I started on mine over 4 years ago, Ken Patterson wasn't doing videos and I hadn't seen any of his work yet, but I knew other people were building layouts with foam. But everybody I was seeing was building a wood framework and putting foam on top of it. And again, I thought that's what I was going to do. But after I built one and seen how rigid it was, I never found a reason to do anything different than just carry on and build more of them.
So
I also never planned to get this far.
there's a couple of comments to your rambling. Adrian Gatson says, just keep going and learning and you'll get there.
Yep.
Big Bill, South Brooklyn Railroad. Hey, Bill, how are you? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? He says, practice, practice, practice. Same as a hobby, practice. So there you go.
And every modeler, regardless of age, skill level, etc., everyone I've ever, for the most part, there's a few exceptions. You got to, for the most part, there's a couple consistencies in the hobby. No layout's ever done. That's not exactly true because Yosemite Valley's layout is Jack Burgess's layout is complete. That's a rare thing in the hobby to have a truly complete layout. I mean, it's a unicorn.
Is it truly complete?
He says it is. He says he has nothing left to do on it. The only thing he's going to do is continue to build a few more of the rolling stock, so he has some of the has every piece of rolling stock the Yosemite Valley has.
Well,
I really enjoy following his work.
Then it's not complete.
But the layout itself is effectively complete. He's never going to work on it again. Maintain it, clean the track every now and then, operate it with friends. He doesn't even operate it much himself. He has friends over and they operate it. He's worked on it for a long time. I think that's a unicorn in the hobby. There are a few others of those. Just about every serious modeler I know, when they get to that level, Lex Parker, for example, had a beautiful scenic layout not that many years ago, maybe 20 years ago. Ripped it out because he wanted to build another one. So most modelers think they have at least one more layout in them because we tear them out and modify them. My hope is with this modular approach I've taken, which we now have a title for it, because again, the Toma stuff had not came out when I started the hobby, or I hadn't found out about any of this stuff. Is that I can continue to use those modules. I can reposition them into larger spaces. I will never build a layout again that is a complete loss when there's a significant change in where I live or what kind of layout I want to have. It should nothing should ever be a complete loss.
Except for when you move into your new house that you're going to build. You keep threatening to build a new house.
That's right. But assuming that I stick with HO scale, it won't be a loss. It will move to the new house. I will set it up and get it operational as is, making a few adjustments and a few extensions that I've already planned for with where I put the section gaps and section joints in. I put the section joints in. They're not consistent. Everybody says, well, what size should a module be? 4 foot, 6 foot? My modules are all kinds of different sizes, from 4 foot, from 3 foot. I've got some 3 foot module, the first one I built, up to a single 8 foot module. I'll never build another one that's 8 foot though. It's all about where the logical break point is. So I broke the 2 first modules that I built in Scenic that everybody's seen for the many years that I've been a part of this community. Those modules with the 4-track yard on it are broke just past the yard throat in across the 4 tracks. So if and when I expand the layout, I will break those 2 modules, separate them by some distance, put 4 tracks between them, and I now have a longer yard as I need prototypically. I even planned for there to be the curve between those 2 modules that would be prototypically correct. So where I had to sacrifice on the prototype, I put a gap so that in the future I can insert the section in between the gaps that makes it closer to prototypically accurate. So it's not for everybody, but it's super fast. It's spectacularly cheap. I've got about 10 modules, 10 or 11 modules, going around a 15 by 15 room and the peninsula. I got maybe $1,000 in the whole layout, not counting structures and rolling stock. Something like $1,000. I mean, I've got several thousand in tools and other such things, but if there was a complete loss of the layout, the only loss would be the labor, time, and investment that I put into it. The amount of money is negligible. It's just spectacularly cheap to work with. I mean, $25 modules of boards of styrofoam, or $30 boards of styrofoam. A couple boards will build a module. You're $50 for an 8 foot section of layout that's got a lot of mounting on it. That's it. So tonight we got, I'm working on this module and I'm going to show you some of the details of it. So last time we talked about some gator foam, mostly talked about the gator foam material because I was so impressed by this material. So rigid, the 1-inch thick material. But I'm also building the top deck with a couple unique considerations that I thought were interesting. First, this does have a return path that is around the back of the layout. So there is a track. I'll talk about a few of the side shots of this. So there is, don't worry about the fallen pieces. So most of this is glued together. I glued it together in sections ahead of our show tonight so that we can work on some of this. So there is a return track around the back of the module that gets you back from the other side of the layout back to return path down and to the back staging. Easy way to get staging around the layouts to run around the outside. I also built a section that was removable in the middle. This section here will have the coal loader on it, built as a single removable piece coal loader and everything, so I can work on it at the workbench, which is the way I prefer to build everything, is setting down. Anything I can do to encourage the lazy modeling style that I prefer. This is removable, but this also provides access in the event of a train derailment or something like that. I've got other ways to do that. I can remove the top of the mountain that covers this back profile. The mountain's going to shape up to the backdrop, covering this backtrack. Some of this will be removable, whereas these sections are complete sections glued together. All right. Also, while I've got it held in such a precarious position, let's talk about one other consideration. So the top deck of my layout has no fascia on it. There will be nothing out here on the fascia. this front of the layout is going to shape down to the front of the layout is going to come down to a point, and it's going to pitch in and out as it navigates around the layout. It's just going to come down to a point. However, I need to provide a spot for LED strip lighting to light. Most of the lighting is above the layout, behind the valance. Remember, on my layout, those of you that have seen it, there are 2 levels behind the valance. The top level is quite narrow like this, and then there's a 2-foot deep level. The valance lights the front of that level up and this level, or that lighting. And then under this layout, or under this shelf, I have to provide LED strip lighting to light the back part of the lower deck. So what I've done is provided for a small strip so that you won't be able to see. So I can run that strip lighting along this way so that you won't be able to see that lighting, and it will ensure that you're casting that light against the backdrop. I have a strip up facing down and a strip this way facing back. That also lets you do some really interesting things with color LED strip lighting. So if you have 2 light strips like that, one facing toward the back against the backdrop, one facing toward the front, you can put the color strip lighting facing the backdrop and use those orange and yellow hues that you have at dusk, and the more yellow hues that you have at dawn. You can use those to light the backdrop up most significantly, not the front of the layout. So in night operations, the front of the layout will still have a white light on it, a dim white light, but a white light. And the backdrop will be lit blue to enforce that night effect. And the same for sunset and dusk and dawn effects, where I'm mostly lighting the backdrop up with the color effects. But you've got to hide those LED strips from the user. It should be ambient lighting, not direct lighting.
So, the one at the bottom.
You guys can take comments for just a
First
second. I'm
off,
going to fix that other camera.
Sir, Big Bill wants to know, do you prefer working with this material? Or is that opening another can of worms that you'll go on dissertation for another 20 minutes?
So do I prefer working with the Gator foam? Gator board specifically? Oh, I love the stuff. It's expensive, but I love it. It's super light, covers the need of building a layout with 0 support. If I was building a desert layout that was flat and I could not get the structural rigidity due to laminated layers the way I do on my lower decks, Gator foam and styrofoam.
Oh, just
Gator
yeah,
board.
even even just laminating the Gator board together. You Are Naked 4. I should go get my hard hat out of the van so that I can play along with you at home.
That's right. I brought an extra one just in case, but that was entire comedy. I had it sitting here in the garage. I stuck it on, and Johnny got a kick out of it, so we kind of stuck with it. So, so I need to carve some foam, but we're going to do a bit of a unique thing because we're going to shape the front edge of the layout. We're going to bring the front edge of the layout to a point.
Are you going to pull a Ken Patterson?
Ken Patterson.
Chainsaw.
We'll see. Do have a hard hat. So I've done 90%, 98% of my layout with a wallpaper knife. That's my favorite tool if I'm doing refined work or modifications. And I've built virtually all the current modules using just a wallpaper knife, styrofoam, and glue. Speaking of that, I want to talk briefly about, well, I've used keyhole saw occasionally, but this is pretty messy. And I've built my layout inside the house, and I can only get away with so much mess. I mean, the fact that I've been able to take over the master bedroom without getting divorce papers is already an accomplishment. So I'm not trying to push my luck. However, I've glued most of my modules together with a couple different techniques because my whole layout is an experiment. It's just a living experiment. I've used Ken's technique of using the spray foam. I think it's awesome. It's a great adhesive technique, and it's unbelievably difficult to do correctly and really easy to screw up. And it requires a lot of weight and really good surfaces to work on to hold the modules together. So I had standardized around using liquid nails for projects. There's a lot of things I didn't like about it. It works. It's strong enough. It's not ridiculously strong if the modules flex. So if you carry them around very much, carry them out, move them around, as I've done recently building my backdrops, I've had to fix a few of the modules where I had a few of the layers delaminate. But I'm really in love with the Gorilla Glue, which is effectively like a spray foam. It is an expandable foam material. This is the polyurethane, Gorilla Glue polyurethane. It's water activated though. So you need to roughen up each surface. You need to spray them both with water, just moist, like you would plaster rock castings or something. Just get them moist. And then this stuff. It does require weight. So I did have to weight these modules when I glued them over the weekend. You do have to put some weight on them, but it's not as significant as trying to adhere with spray foam, where you really need about 50 pounds to keep that stuff in shape. Right. Yeah. The Gorilla Glue polyurethane glue is the water activated stuff. None of the other glues are. The spray foam is not. The wood glue's not. None of the others. This particular glue is water activated. It will activate on its own from moisture in the air. Probably, if you're in a relatively humid environment, as we are here in the mid South, it's probably fine. If you were putting this stuff down in Arizona, for sure spray it. But I would recommend, if you're putting it down for adhesive properties, spray it with water. Get the benefit of the moisture to make it do its job. No, Gorilla
No.
White Glue or Gorilla brand wood glue do not are traditional glues in every sense of the word. I like the Gorilla brand wood glue, although I recently watched some reviews that were not as fond of that glue for structural rigidity, but for building scale models, it's good. This stuff is effectively expandable foam pre-mixed together, like the two-part stuff that you would get in gallons or 55-gallon drums to fill the bottom of a barge with, pre-mixed together. So it does have a shelf life, and it is water activated. It's kind of like the stuff that's in a spray can. It does not expand nearly as much, and it has a much stronger adhesive property versus the spray foam stuff. So
Just
it
a
does
little.
expand though, and you can fill gaps with it.
If you're going to store it for any length of time, put it in one of those plastic sealable bags.
Yeah, keep humidity and condensation away from it.
Away from it. Yep.
So I've done all of mine with that. However, recently I needed to reshape a few of the quarter modules when I put my backdrops in. And it was going to be pretty tough to saw through 7 layers of 2-inch foam. So I bought a new electric tool to get the job done. And I really enjoyed it. I bought this one maybe a year ago, and I have seen that Ken Patterson's done it too, and for good reason. I've seen him continue to do recent modules not using it. I don't know why, because this is my preferred. If I can afford to make the mess, if it's outside or in the garage, this is my preferred way to work. So, although the noise is not as pleasant, so we'll have to mute, let you guys talk amongst yourself for a minute while I make a mess. 3 minutes. Okay. Well, you guys talk amongst yourself for 3 minutes.
All right.
Well, since he's gone, I'll turn my microphone back on. Just to let everybody know, earlier people were going, "Who's Angie?" Angie is his wife. So, somewhat tolerant. That's the reason why you got the master bedroom. You can't go no further, though.
No.
Yeah, Adrian said buy a turkey trimmer to cut the foam. It's lighter, and you can use it one-handed, I guess. But you know Andy, he likes the big toys. Kind of like Tool Time Tim.
I thought it was tool time too.
Yeah. All right. Why are you, Andy? Do you have any input on large foam modules expanding and contracting with big temperature changes? Now,
Uh,
he's in the house, so he doesn't have those kind of swings. I can say there at the hobby shop where I used to go on Wednesday nights, we used a 2-inch pink foam. We actually glued it with contact cement to Luan plywood, and because they do turn the heat and air conditioning off when nobody's in the store, it did shrink up. We wound up with some pretty big cracks in between the sheets.
It
the
happens.
the thing with the styrofoam as well. If you're going to use contact cement, make sure it's water based. If you use the one that has the solvent based, it'll eat the pink foam.
Absolutely. It's got to be water based. You can do some things. So there's a couple things. The newer formulations of extruded foam from Corning, Owens Corning, the pink stuff, probably from DuPont and others that make the other various colors. They have modified their process and some of the chemicals involved that are leaching out over time and causing the shrinkage. They have reduced the amount of shrinkage that you can expect to a total shrinkage of something less than a half inch over 5 years. It's going to happen though. You can help some of that if you glue it to wood. You reduce some of that. Glue it to gator foam. You'll reduce some of that a bit. That's another reason I'm really fond of this gator foam technique. And I may even go back and stick my bottom modules on half-inch MDF or something for that reason to reduce it. For me, because my layout is not a single layout that's permanent and it's modular, um, whatever gap happens in the seams between the modules. And over the last several years, all the shrinkage that is likely to occur has already happened. So when I have no need to remove the modules to do serious work like put staging in or backdrops in, which are now complete on my layout, I can seam those modules together permanently and fill that gap between the modules that has occurred. One thing of note is I did a bit of experimenting with this with the first little dioramas I built. There's some things I don't like about gluing track directly to styrofoam the way Kim Patterson does. Works for him. If it works for you, great. I would love it to work for me. Um, I would still favor using some roadbed material, either the pipe insulation or refrigerant line insulation that Ralph has turned us on to, which I think is superb, especially for staging, or Homabed or cork if you have to, because I'm not a fan. Um, but Homabed, I use Homasote. On much of the top level, I'm likely to use the pre-manufactured Homabed. Here, because there's several tracks in a yard under a cold loader that are relatively flat, I'm going to continue to stick with the half-inch Homasote. Also, paint. If you seal up all the modules and paint them all, you will reduce the speed at which the evacuation of chemicals happens, and all you'll do is just make it take a lot longer for the shrinkage that's going to happen anyway to happen. I would rather get the shrinkage out of the way.
Here we go, guys. Do you need a countdown? Oh no, he put his mic off. All right. I agree with Adrian Gadsden. He says use the heavy foaming sparingly. Like you said, it will shrink. A good wood frame works well and will last longer. I agree with that. My whole thing is a wood frame. I don't use styrofoam at all. Well, I shouldn't say at all. It's not my main part of construction. It is for doing scenery, but not for uh, roadbed and sub-roadbed and tabletop, if you want to call it that. Oh, Curtis is here. He says goodbye. Good night. Guess he didn't like what we were saying. So you are naked 4 says Angie should start a show called A Modeler's Wife, just for women. It can be like a support group for the spouses of the model railroaders. They can discuss how to live with modelers and maybe needlepoint. Robert, all foam construction does have its uses, though. Yes. Michael? He's laughing at Robert, I guess. LOL. Or he's laughing at Andy with the chainsaw. Maybe that's what it is. I know I am. It's funny how you want to grab the end of the chainsaw to guide it more. I think that's Andy's parking space, isn't it? So he'll be at the shop cleaning this up for all night.
Just leave the door open or something. It'll sweep up. It's not even that big of a mess.
I'm surprised it's not flying all over the place. Oh no, that would be the white pellet foam.
The white pellet is statically charged, so it goes everywhere. Also, what I found is using a stainless Sureform, which is a pretty handy tool, by the way, for styrofoam work. It produces a dust that's much finer, and it flies something fierce. The chainsaw is like larger particulate, and gravity seems to have its due with it. I think one last module, and we'll have the hill shape. But it's a faster, and I really enjoy it because you're carving what's going to be the final landform. I mean, here in a few minutes, I'm going to slap a bunch of ground goop on this, but we have the basic final form.
So Andy, my question is, who are you visualizing is at the end of that chainsaw?
Oh, yeah, there's a short list of those people.
Oh, look at that, stuck on the end of his blade.
Also, so the first module that I built has no ground goop on it because I hadn't found out about this stuff. Hadn't found Mike Coffalone's work enough to have the minor crush that I have on his efforts, on his modeling. My first module, and the first half of the 4-track module at least, is just styrofoam, sanded, Speaking of that, you can straighten this whole thing up too. This makes a bit more of a mess, but a bit of a belt sander to straighten up some of it. If you're looking for a desert seat or something that's particularly smooth, a belt sander or a jitterbug or whatever, lateral sander, electric sander will do the job. The first module was done that way, and I used a little bit of spackle to fill the seams in the modules where they're a little bit harder, especially with the various glue methods I was using back then. Also, stay away from any glue that's evaporative. I see people glue styrofoam together with wood glue and white glue. Glue it together. Take two pieces, glue them together, throw them somewhere dry, and come back in 6 months. The glue will still be wet. Come back in a couple of years, I think it'll still be wet.
In the center, yes.
That glue depends on evaporation. You need a chemically active glue that activates chemically, not evaporatively. So that was a complete module. I glued the modules together last night or night before last, something like that. Took me maybe 45 minutes, 30, 45 minutes to rough cut some styrofoam. I rough cut it with skill saw, quick and easy. You use utility blade too. Slap it together, throw some weight on it. So all in, I got about an hour in the module. And you can cover the thing in ground goop immediately. Now, when I built the large
You can
one,
go back with your box cutter now, and you can fine tune your cut there too, right?
absolutely, and especially if you were working in rock work or a structure. For example, I probably won't cover this section until I get the structure designed for it. That'll go on the coal loader, and I'll cut the hillside for it. Although my indication is that I'm going to scratch build that structure from the prototype photograph. I posted that the prototype photograph of this area. That photograph is pre-1950. It would be appropriate for the 1950 era. In the 1986 era, I'm still figuring that out. So whatever structure ends up going there, scratch built or otherwise. And honestly, to tell you the truth, this may sound like a cop out to those of you guys that know I'm a bit of a persnickety guy. I'm likely to build a good representative coal loader there that would have been appropriate for the era, that covers a couple tracks and get the layout running. And if I decide to come back and do something that's very accurate to a particular era or something, I'll probably build two loaders that go in this spot, matching the same thing. One in the 1950 wood construction, and one that'll be a corrugated steel structure.
Okay.
Now, when I build a new house or buy a building out and put outside or build a building out back, which is, I don't know, which is more likely at this point, and I expand my layout and I fill the gaps between with big open sections of open running, I think I'm going to try spraying ground goop or a more liquefied form of ground goop through a spray hopper, the way you put popcorn or other wall texture. I hate popcorn, but the way that you apply that stuff is with a hopper and a spray gun. And if you liquefy this ground goop, it'll go through a hopper. It's paper mache. Most people use celluclay, latex paint, vermiculite. The original recipe for Blue Sassy has white glue in it, but I don't like using the white glue. It's a matter of preference. Also, Ralph will be proud of me, minus the latex glove. If you're covering a whole lot of area, it probably does make sense to get your hands involved.
Whoa. Mark this on the calendar, Johnny.
But you can cover an area quickly.
He's got a plastic glove on.
Yes, I told you minus the gloves.
Oh, never mind marking it on the calendar.
Listen, I'm not putting. And also I'm going to glue the sections together after I've got the basic ground cover on. I've glued multiple of these sections together. I've kept some of it separate. These sections are all glued together because they needed to be. That'll let me fine tune these or modify these sections before I glue them into their final resting position. Also, I took the chainsaw and kind of pointed the blade or whatever you call the, I guess you just call it the blade, to the front of the chainsaw directly down into the material to get more undulation. But being able to pick these modules up, I may even wait a little bit longer to stick them down, because then I could work on each module, putting dirt and scenery and static grass and all that on them without even having to glue them down. I just don't want to put the main top structure on that covers the back track until I've got the valley basically done and the track work done back in the back, so that I leave a flat surface to apply weight to. So my first modules that I built were just sanded styrofoam with a little bit of spackle filling in some of the gaps, and then sanded with a jitterbug or a piece of sandpaper. They were all sanded perfectly smooth. If I was a vampire, if anybody knows anybody who could make me an immortal, because I think vampires would make the best model railroaders. Could you imagine what kind of layout you could build in like 400 years? But until that happens, we have to work with the time constraints we have, and it's, busy lives these days. What I found with the ground goop is all you really have to do is approximate the scenery form, cover it in ground goop. You could easily modify it or lay the ground goop on a little thicker, whereas spackle doesn't really work but well over about an 1/8 inch thick, give or take, like building roads out of spackle. About an 1/8 inch is what you've got to work with. Using ground goop, it actually doesn't work as well at an 1/8 inch. It works much better when you put 3/16 or more on a thickness on. So you kind of need to add lay a bit of a thick coat on. If it does crack, because sometimes it does, if you put it on quite thin, it'll crack in the drying process. I just come back with my trusty tool that Ralph's super happy that I like to use. My favorite is an artist palette knife. I love this little tool. And for all the argument that Ralph has about my technique, it is more accurate, and I can more closely resemble the type of scenery that I want to resemble with it. Also, the more removable modules you have like this, the easier they are to pick up and clean or dust off. But you can super quickly cover a module. And in the matter of an hour of your life, you could be to the point of covering it in dirt. Now, even the first ground goop jobs that I done, I tried to get the styrofoam pretty close to the finished result. You're much better to just approximate what you want, even if you leave some gaps between the styrofoam. If you end up cutting the styrofoam a little bit, you could put ground goop on 1.5 inches thick if you needed to in sections. It'd take a while to set up, and it'll consume quite a bit of ground goop, but gosh, this stuff's cheap, and you can make it by the 5-gallon bucket for a few dollars. A lot of people use celluclay. That's the original recommended method for this stuff. I do use celluclay a lot of times, especially I make a finished version of this that I use celluclay in because it's a finer material. This is my rough coat material. It's made with latex paint that I buy by the 5-gallon jug for $48 at Walmart, so less than $10 a gallon. And I use cellulose insulation. And I bought a 15 or 20 pound sack of the stuff. It's about that tall and about that big around. It's like a bale of straw. And I bought a piece that big that will likely last me my entire layout 3 times over. And it wasn't 15 or 20 bucks, probably, maybe $10. It was dirt cheap. So you take one of those, throw a bunch in a 5-gallon bucket, take a 5-gallon bucket of paint. Vermiculite cost about $3 or $4 for a pretty good sized sack of the stuff. It's an incredibly cheap material to work with. I mean, don't get me wrong, plaster's not expensive either, especially if you don't buy the pre-mixed, or if you buy hydrocal in 40-pound sacks, that's a pretty cheap material to work with too.
Well, you're going to use hydrocal to mix with your fibrous material?
Well, you know what?
A little bit of
Sculptable, okay? You know, the funniest thing I find is that the people who don't like ground goop use Sculptamold. Sculptamold and ground goop are only different by one material.
paint.
The hardener in the hardening agent that makes this rigid in ground goop is the latex paint with its hardening agent. The hardening agent in Sculptamold is plaster. The only difference in the two materials. And you could take Sculptamold and add color to it as well. I would recommend adding that as a dry pigment color, either using dry concrete pigments, or most likely by just using Tipra or whatever, dry pigment paint. Throw a little bit of Tipra in it, mix your Sculptamold, go to town. But Tipra is, or Sculptamold is a kind of pre-made product that is generally tailored to our hobby as such, since it has a specific use case, tends to be a little bit more expensive.
It's paper. It's paper mache with what do you
Plaster.
call it? Plaster of Paris in it.
Yep. And you can make that yourself too. If you prefer working with plaster and or Sculptamold, take that same cellulose blow-in paper insulation that you buy from Menards or Home Depot or whatever. Buy that stuff, buy some hydrocal, mix the two together in a big thing, and then grab a little bit out, throw a little water in it, you got Sculptamold. Same thing. No reason to buy a specific for hobby use that's going to cost you a lot more money. And by all means, it's not all about savings. This is an expensive hobby, but if I could save some money and get the exact same results I want, that leaves money that, you know, scale trades can get me out of.
Okay. See, and I use plaster of Paris or plaster cloth. I make my rock work out of plaster of Paris. The plaster cloth, I don't buy the Woodland Scenic stuff because they want too much money for it, as far as I'm
Absolutely.
concerned. You go to an art supply store and you get 3 times as much as you would for the same amount you get from Woodland Scenics for the same price.
Or a medical supply. You know, I've been the guy
Yeah.
who's given plaster a hard time because I don't like plaster, but I started using that plaster cloth 20-some years ago when I was a teenager, and I didn't know anybody else doing the same thing except the guys in town. I'm sure other people were doing it, but I hadn't seen it in the hobby press. I hadn't heard anybody at the hobby shop that I worked at talk about it. The guys at the Modular Club were using it. They were buying it from a medical supply store, the place you go get your oxygen tanks refilled or something. And they were buying it in big old fat rolls that were a foot wide.
Yeah. Where was I reading it? You Are Naked 4, New Ferris Railroad. He uses what was it? New Ferris Railroad. I use joint compound and toilet paper.
I tell you,
Good
I've
brand.
used toilet paper before. I built an in-scale layout and used toilet paper until seeing Markland of Sweden,
Do his
his
water.
YouTube channel, who's a must follow for any of you guys. It's not exactly U.S. modeling. It's a different kind of different stuff, but he's a must follow. He does stuff with toilet paper that blows my mind.
Yep. The thing about toilet paper is the closest thing you can get to paper mache, because once you wet it, it just falls apart.
Well,
Which you want. You want the wood fiber in your mix.
so I was watching these guys that are using Vallejo and AK and Big by Ammo and stuff that have those little, 8 or ounce or something little tubs of a very fine ground material that's really good if you're building a small diorama to set a Abrams tank on or something. That dirt material is spectacular for that, and it's super fine. So when I built the river going across the module, I was going to have a lot of dirt exposed that have some sharp edges that have roots coming out of it and stuff. And I've already built all of that. I needed a paper mache material that was finer and it was not as flaky as this material. So I took toilet paper, and I've got a wire brush that goes in my drill, and I stuck it down at the bottom of a 5-gallon jug, and I went to town on a roll of toilet paper with a wire brush, and then mixed a little paint with it, a little bit of vermiculite. You know, I made the equivalent of this. It's my fine formulation of ground goop using the toilet paper. And when I'm doing highly detailed work, if I'm building a road that has a raised center section or something, that's the material I would use. For doing rough cover, what I want is that, you know, cheapest, fastest covering material I can find.
My only problem with joint compound, doesn't matter what you mix it with, it tends to want to crack.
It's going to shrink.
It shrinks a lot.
Yep. But for a rough undercoat, I got no problem with that. Well, honestly, if it works for you, if you like using rat wire and concrete, go to town, man. Whatever works for you. All I'm doing is this is what I like, because I despise working with plaster. It's messy. Not that styrofoam's not sometimes too. It gets in absolutely everything. And every time you touch it to modify it, it busts and comes off in particulates. I can take a knife, carve out a section of this. It comes out in one chunk. I throw it in a garbage sack and I go to town on it. There's no mess, you know, no muss, no fuss, whatever. But I'll have this covered in about 2 minutes or something. We've got a module complete. Complete's a strong word, but base ground cover ready to set in place on the top of the layout. I need to glue these top sections down, and I need to put the track on the back section. I've got a piece of Homosote that I had up here a minute ago, laying over there, that's ready to receive the track for the coal loaders. Not to be a disappointment, but I am going to use Flex Track for now on the top shelf so that I can get it running. Actually, I'm going to on the sections I've not completed of the bottom layout. I'm going to lay a bunch of Flex Track and get trains running. Come back and hand lay track maybe in the future, what I haven't already hand laid. But in a matter of an hour, what we've done real time in a show, plus about 30 minutes or so that I had before, you've got a module ready to receive dirt. This module can receive dirt immediately, right on top of the ground goop if you want. I often do. So you've got a completed module ready to put dirt on.
So Michael Lumbertino wants to know why. Why not just latex paint like Ken Patterson, then scenic it?
Okay. What Ken's doing is he's doing what I initially started out doing with the foam. He is making sure that the foam represents the underlayment that he wants, and he's getting it very accurate. Now, couple benefits to both ways. The styrofoam without the latex paint or without the ground goop on it, you've got to do something. You've got to use something to deal with the seams. Now, Ken is modeling a slight undulation of Missouri. Missouri area, much flatter. I'm modeling a much steeper terrain, so it's going to have layers. Those layers don't hide well if you don't cover them with something. You could say this clean the way Ken does and use a bit of spackle. It gets you basically the same place, but it's very time consuming. Whereas I can rough finish this and throw ground goop on it, and I can put it, there's sections that I put ground goop on here where it's a 1/4 inch thick. I kind of just felt it with my hand or when I'm using a blade, and I filled out what I needed to. It just has to be rough. So it's just faster. It also has a texture to it, whereas a sanded smooth styrofoam is smooth as a baby's butt. And that's why I like the vermiculite. Now, when I used that really fine material in my riverbed, I didn't use vermiculite in it at all. It was just paper mache and latex paint to make that really smooth stuff. And it doesn't have as much structural rigidity, but this has a bit of texture to it. So it gives your ground surface material some bite. And it gives the natural undulation. The hillsides of Appalachia are pretty much not smooth anywhere. I mean, unless they dug coal off the top of it.
Right.
So So I like using it for that purpose. I don't like using the coarse vermiculite. I do buy the fine stuff, or I run it through a blender when my wife's not home. No, the vermiculite gives it some texture and some bite. It also makes it go, it spreads the distance further, gives you some texture. All of that's somewhat visible in the finished result in person. Our webcams don't do a good enough job of showing that, but now you're basically ready to. I mean, I could slap some flex track down, a little bit of dirt, a little bit of ballast. That's a
Dwight
complete.
has a comment here that I have to disagree with. He says, "What Mark of Sweden did not point out is European toilet paper is double thick as
Yeah, you
American."
can get good toilet
And
paper in America. You just can't buy the John Wayne stuff.
I disagree. He's just buying single ply. Go out and buy the Charmin. Don't be so cheap.
Yeah, just don't. You're probably not going to get great results with the John Wayne toilet paper. The regular stuff would do the job, but again, whatever works for you. And actually, the strongest recommendation for all the YouTube videos, the Trademaster TV, Moderator Video Plus, us, on here talking about things with all of our 12 opinions for the 7 or 8 guys that are ever present. Model Railroad Hobbyist forums and all the trade magazines. Look at every opinion you can out there, and then go get your hands dirty and try a few techniques. Find the ones that work for you and the ones that you could argue with Ralph about later, because that's basically what I do.
There you go.
So anyway, module covered. Put some dirt on it. I'll get some flex track stuck on this thing for for next month. Here right away after that, though, I'm gonna start working on the scratch of this structure that is the coal loader for this. For any of you guys interested in what this seed's prototype fidelity will look like, go to the Model Railroading Live Facebook page and like my post there if you care. I hate people who beg for subscriptions, but go and look at the picture anyway if you care. Also, if you're not a member of Facebook, you can go to modelrailroadinglive.com and you'll find our Facebook feed on there under the Find Us Online page, so that even if you're not a Facebook member or a participant, you can still read. While you can't respond to, you can read our Facebook posts. That way you're not excluded just because, Facebook is a bit shady. I get it. But take a look. I posted a picture of the prototype of this seed. It's Russell Creek Branch, Virginia City, on the old Norfolk and Western Clinch Valley District. And we built a module in a little over an hour and a half that we just need to slap some track on. And now the fun stuff happens. So it's an hour of getting dirty. And from then on, it's all the fun stuff. It's all the stuff we like doing. You get all that crap work out of the way.
See how easily he cleaned off his hand there?
Yeah.
Stripped off the glove and he's done.
And if you're covering area quick, I love my little tools and my blades. If you're covering area quick, the glove is great. If you're covering areas quickly and you don't need precision.
But you have to agree with me that getting in there with your hands, whether they're covered in latex gloves, is the best way to put it on.
Okay, when you're not around, I might admit that to Johnny.
But going back with a spatula later.
If it is not refined work, if I'm not shaping to the side of the roads or roadbed, the hands are quite fun and entirely enjoyable. Yes, I hate to agree with you. That's your one for 2020. You got it right away, out of the way, so that's your one agreement.
Wow.
All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us tonight on the Build Show. Again, we got Johnny coming up Thursday. On the 29th, we got Big Bill and Who's Big Bill talking to. And forward to Ralph's show coming out on the 12th of February, where he's going to be weathering a locomotive. I'm super stoked about that. Special. That's right. Big Bill's special show. They're always special. It's Big Bill. It's special. But we'll see you guys on Thursday for Johnny's Trade Talk show. Then we got the upcoming shows. Take a look at our Facebook post. Thank you guys for joining us. I'll see you again in February. Me and Ralph see you in February. Get on the Build Show.
Right on. Catch you later, guys.